Hello and welcome to Blockchain Gaming World episode 45 with me, Jon Jordan, and joining me this week is James from Blockchain Gaming Biz. How's it going, James?
Yeah, fantastic. How about you?
Yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to be fantastic. It is Friday, but yeah, pretty good. So talking about the world of blockchain games as ever, and this time we're kind of not going into particularly the news cycle, but we're going to talk about a company we haven't mentioned before, which is Enjin. We're going to go in a bit more depth about what Enjin's doing, because just over the months, they've been kind of putting together what's quite an interesting, I don't know what you call it, platform ecosystem, and I think it's kind of worth us delving into that a little bit. So, James, do you want to give us a quick overview of what Enjin is and what they are up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Enjin is a pretty interesting ecosystem. So, one of the first things that we've noticed about Enjin was its ERC 1155 token protocol. And that one came out last year. We'd previously discussed about that one and the kind of item interoperability that it allows, along with the games that it partners up with. So, at this moment in time, I think it's made up of, over 20 different gaming titles. And with those ones, they work together in order to allow for items to transcend one game to another. And along with that one, each of its items, its NFTs, are backed by a certain amount of Enjin coin. That is one of the things that's supposed to give them a greater degree of stability over time, as well as allowing them to be melted down for users to simply just monetize directly or to sell interoperably. But along with that one too, it offers something kind of interesting in way of gaming retention. So not only allowing for a high level of replayability through interoperable assets, but also through massive, like, multiple games spanning, like, quests, which allow you to unlock or discover rewards that are unlock, which reward you with a certain amount of Enjin. And this comes under the broader category of what it refers to as its multiverse.
Yeah, so I think that's the thing that we've kind of mentioned kind of a lot, about this idea of a multiverse. And I guess when I first heard about it, it kind of seemed a bit old fashioned. Like the multiverse seemed like something people might talk about in the 1990s with kind of Neil Stevenson and Snow Crash and that kind of stuff. But the definition aside, I guess what is interesting is in the blockchain world, we've spoken, or generally people talk a lot about interoperability. So basically, an NFT, a digital item that's used in one game, can then go and be used in another game. Now, that's technically fairly easy to do, but I think kind of commercially and operationally, much harder to do in a sense of it making sense. So I guess we have lots of games where you can use a CryptoKitty in another game, but it tends to be more for aesthetic reasons rather than gameplay reasons. And I think one of the interesting things with Enjin is they've come with a bit more of a kind of, I don't know what the quite term is. I don't know if it's like a hard approach or a more kind of defined approach, where it seems to be. I mean, they just look at their website now. They kind of call Enjin. Where is it? Let me just scroll down. Here we go. An all-in-one blockchain game development platform. So they're quite kind of specific about they're doing kind of everything. And I think a little bit it comes from their background, because they're a company they've been around for a while, and kind of mainly setting up Minecraft servers and that kind of back end stuff for kind of online game communities. So they know quite a lot about kind of IT and tech. So they're good at that sort of thing. And I think this is just, they've continued that kind of approach, and they kind of said, well, we're making a platform, and if you want to sign up for our platform, then you basically have to use all our bits and bobs. We kind of make the decisions for you. So it's interesting you mentioned this ERC 1155, which we'll go into in a bit more detail, I think. That's their kind of token standard, and they have their coin, Enjin coin, and all the assets in all the Enjin games are backed with this Enjin coin. And then they have this idea of interoperability, which isn't optional as far as I can see. It is, if you are going to be part of our platform, then your game must support these items. I'm going to go into the item thing in a bit more detail. So I don't know, how do you? I mean, the blockchain world is very decentralized by its nature. It's very tends to be a little bit anachronistic, a little bit into, not necessarily into anarchy, but not particularly into rules. Do you think the Enjin's approach, which is quite clearly, if you into our platform, you obey our rules, do you think that appeals to developers? Or
I mean, I can certainly see how it would be a little bit anachronistic and a little bit seemingly contradictory when it comes to what blockchain is supposed to be, which is to create this massive framework of decentralized and yet like peer-to-peer style nodes. So when it comes to Enjin, I can certainly see why people would have qualms about it. But for game developers, it's all about fostering a couple of additional things. So one of them being mass adoption, replayability, and effective monetization process. And I think with something like Enjin, while it is in its early stages with regards to bringing out blockchain game titles that prove effective on this system, there are certainly a couple of unique selling points that Enjin has over other platforms. One of them being the multiverse integration, as you said before, having a strong enough economy behind it and allowing for players to explore and traverse multiple games at a single time. There are definitely a lot of incentives there for game developers to get behind it. But from a philosophical track about the fact that you have to really abide by the rules of Enjin, I can see that getting on some people's nerves.
I mean, I guess the contrary side is that it's fine having no rules, but then nothing gets done, which is kind of the kind of opposite thing. Whereas not much interoperability has happened apart from stuff with CryptoKitties, just because it's really hard to do. So I guess the Enjin's point of view would be, well, yeah, we'll have some rules, otherwise no one's going to do anything and nothing's going to happen. So from that point of view, it is the option, and I think we'll look at some of the games that are being developed using it, and they do seem to have a lot of support from game developers who probably wouldn't otherwise have the technical knowledge to get involved in this business. It seems like a lot of people involved in Enjin are not particularly heavy duty blockchain enthusiasts. They're kind of more like indie game developers who kind of like, oh, this could be interesting. So from that point of view, Enjin seems to be really interesting or really helpful to them, that it's doing all the complicated blockchain stuff, providing all the SDKs and providing the Unity integration. So you just basically make your game, plug in effectively this blockchain component that handles items and economy, and off you go. So there's no in it, all the kind of in any kind of commercial kind of business cases. I don't think there's any right or wrong. There's right ways that some companies, right approaches some companies should take. That might not be the same for other companies. So I guess we'll leave that there. And we should say the one thing Enjin is inconvertibly very good at is the technical details of blockchain. I mean, clearly there's been some arguments about who exactly invented ERC 721, but obviously Vitek from Enjin was one of the people behind that, and certainly ERC 1155 is totally their thing. So from that point of view, Enjin has provided a good framework. Shall we go and have a look at some games, shall we? Right, so see if I can find on their website some games. Should point out, the one thing with Enjin is none of these games are live yet. Is that right? Some of them are kind of in testing, but none of them are...
Yeah, they're in early alpha and I think some in beta stages, but other than that, it's mostly pre-sale and in development. I mean, I think some of the more active ones on the social media standpoint and even from in-game footage, ironically enough, tends to be Age of Rust. And that one's got a long as hell roadmap, I think. It's not until next year that it's officially going to be out.
Yeah. We'll come to that in a minute. So we've got Nine Lives Arena, which is like a PvP 3D slasher game, isn't it?
Yeah, they make use of a pretty interesting system of smart contracts. So the way it would work for duelists in the arena is that you would hook up any of your kind of characters with any form of digital assets. If you took part in the Kickstarter, you get pretty exclusive NFTs, including a skull belt. And the idea is, with 9 lives, if you lose those 9 lives, your hero dies. Anything that it's wearing gets solidified into a trophy, which you can trade if you want to. So it's interesting in that regard, but as for progress reports, I haven't really seen that many from them.
Yeah, I think that, like all these kind of games, they tend to be a fairly small team, so they may have bitten off a little bit more than they can chew in terms of their scheduling. But yeah, it's interesting concept behind it, and again, they're going for consoles, which again seems to me pretty a little bit overly difficult, maybe. But there we go. There's those guys. Crypto Fights. I don't know anything about them. They are again an arena-based 1v1 turn-based fighting game. Age of Rust, the one you mentioned. Now, Age of Rust is interesting. I do know a bit about that. So Age of Rust has been knocking around for a long time. It's been in development, I guess, for 2 years now. It's mainly just one guy, so that's why it's taken so long. But it's a pretty high-end 3D kind of exploration shooter, which has kind of come on to Enjin in the fairly recent months. It's really interesting. I think it's one that gamers would just go, "Oh, this looks interesting."
Yeah, those are two pretty strange ones. I mean, Age of Rust for its long development time. If we zip back to crypto fights for a little bit, they recently made the decision that they're not only using Enjin, but they're using Bitcoin SV.
Really, brother.
Yeah, I mean, the justification that they gave for it was the fact that with its arena mode, it involves a lot of transactions over time. And the fact that it goes from 1v1, I think, up to a maximum of 4v4. So as a result, it means it crunches a lot of transactions over time. Its application of SV is supposed to allow for that to be more streamlined.
Didn't they get funding by one of those guys though?
They did, yeah.
And that's the reason. That's the reason they've chosen that blockchain. They got funded by what's his name? I don't know. I don't know where Bitcoin SV stands these days with all the nonsense going on in that world. I'm not going to delve into that one. We've got cats in mechs, top-down shoot 'em up featuring cats in mechs. Yeah.
Like, honestly, I expected them to go from a completely different direction in terms of art style for that one, but it's about humanoid cats and mech. So yeah,
Yeah, it's what it is. Forest Knight, which is an interesting looking one, but again, pretty small dev team, I think.
yeah, it's one of the only titles that is on mobile, I think, and it started off with a pretty much a one man army.
Mm, mm. And there's other ones you know about this. So Ultiverse is this sounds like totally bonkers. Is going to integrate the blockchain assets into 17 interconnecting worlds. So it's a gaming and world building platform. So that's like that sounds again like all these things are just a bit ambitious to me. Maybe that's why I'm not a game developer. I haven't got the ambition.
There is something quite daunting that they're trying to do. So I'd previously spoken to Scott Kinney, who's I think the CEO of Ultiverse, and he was talking about the application of LEGS, which is an acronym, but I can't remember for the life of me what it stands for. But either way, what it basically infers is that it's a hosting system to allow users to allow for mini maps for raiding, for adventures or quest giving. Effectively allows the user to monetize the sort of LEGS that they have, while also allowing for players to get other new organic like mechanics that they can use within the Ultiverse universe.
So there we go. So some of the games, they are a lot of games. I mean, I think that's the one interesting thing with Enjin is they have done a lot of really good work with their kind of developer relations team, and they go to all the conferences and have done for a number of years, and they they really talk to developers and kind of get them interested. Quite active in that sort of stuff. So from that point of view, technically they're very good, and they've got a lot of games in there. I guess, and they've just announced. I mean, there was a bit of news this week, so they just announced this new thing called Enjin Spark, which is kind of a another initiative to get more developers on board. So I'm just reading this from their Medium. So they say over 550 developers have downloaded the Enjin blockchain SDK for Unity, which is quite a pretty decent number. I mean, obviously, majority of those will just be downloading it just to see what it's like. And they say 5,000 are playing on the Kovan testnet on the Enjin platform, so that's the Ethereum testnet. So that's 5,000. Presuming that's 5,000 individual developers, but that's pretty good. And they got this Enjin Spark thing, which is again for new game developers who want to kind of join up and get access to the new Enjin mainnet. So they kind of ICO'd on Ethereum, and the Enjin coin is a ERC20 token at the moment, but at some point they're going to have their own custom blockchain. And they also, it's interesting. Enjin are not just providing the tech kind of background, the tech support, the tech infrastructure. They're also getting involved in things like kind of publishing, or not publishing, kind of marketing. That's the best way to do it, isn't it? So they are providing a lot for developers who kind of sign up with them. There's one you were writing about this week, Six Dragons, which is kind of a new one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So they are along with Forgotten Artifacts, Space Misfits, and Spirit Clash, they're one of the 4 that joined the Spark initiative very recently. And along with that one too, they've kicked off their pre-sale. I think earlier this week they managed to sell about 65% of their inventory, so equating to about 90 grand worth of assets.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had a discussion about whether 90 grand was a lot of money or not. It's kind of, it's interesting because it's obviously more than 10 grand, but less than a million million quid. So, but I guess for a fairly small developer, they're getting, and it's not so much about the money, I suppose. It's about the fact that there's people out there who are happy to spend $90,000 buying digital items in a game that's not out yet. I mean, I guess that's some measure of validation, which I guess is probably more valuable than the money. Although the money, obviously, you can only do so much with validation. If you have to pay people, you probably need money.
It's one of the reasons why I've had I've had discussions with people on our Telegram feed regarding what makes for an effective system of fundraising. And I've always been under the impression that a company or a games project cannot rely on just the pre-sale alone. It has to be part of a framework of different funding avenues, because it can so easily backfire on projects if they don't have an engaged user base.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think generally at the moment is you just can't raise enough money through pre-sales or crowdsourcing or anything, or crowdfunding or anything like that to do a decent project. You can make a game for under $1 million, but any half decent game is going to require getting on for that sum of money. And I think probably, I don't know, they don't really mention very much. I don't know how much Enjin do in terms of helping out for funding. They don't mention it overtly, and it's not like they raised a ton of money when they did their own ICO in the end of 2017. So I think that probably it's more to do with the kind of consulting they can help out with rather than funding people. But right, so the other thing we're going to talk about is this idea of kind of interoperability and Enjin. See what they actually call them. I'm looking at this PDF, and they call it a multiverse asset. So basically, this is one of these Enjin-backed assets that can be used across multiple games. So it's interesting. They say in this document, there's a few examples. So it could be items, a sword, characters that can be used in multiple games, a pet that follows the player in the game, vehicles, a car that could be used in multiple games, or a NPC psychic. So let's go through some of the assets they do have. So there's the Arch Spire, which is sometimes known as Starborn Icicles. So these are obviously some sort of fantasy type thing. There's the Soul Shift Armor. There's the Storm Wall. So the Storm Wall was the one they were really pushing, which is which is a shield. What do you think about that? What do you think about the integrations they were putting this kind of shield into all different games?
Yeah, we saw a couple of interoperable examples there. That's kind of where Age of Rust was really taking the head on that one. So Stormwall showed up as this massive, more than body plus wide shield. They then showed it off in Nine Lives Arena straight away, where it takes on almost like a celestial shield with a disembodied thing in the middle of it. It's cool to see that in action, and they got an interesting mechanic for ensuring balance over the games for any of those items.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the since you kind of have these rules in place, that then you do obviously have this issue that all the kind of game design in all the games has to deal with the fact that there's these what have to be kind of fairly high value items that are going to work in all these games and have to be integrated into all these games. And if you make, I guess, at any point there's changes to the item on a high level, then that can ripple through into problems for all these games. I think the other thing that strikes me is all these things. Looking through another one now, there's the Forge Hammer. There's the Epochrome Sword. Now these are all clearly items that work very well in fantasy style games, which is actually the majority of what Enjin stuff is at the moment. A lot of Enjin games are kind of fantasy style RPG, or if they're not kind of overtly RPG, they're kind of combat based. So if you have a combat based kind of multiverse, then having things like swords, and there's also a gun, like some sort of laser gun. Having hammers, having shields, having armor, and having these crystal things are. That all kind of makes sense because all those games have those kind of elements. But if you're going to do battle races, I mean, battle races is a game that's in development and is not part of the Enjin universe. But if you're going to have battle races, which does actually have combat elements in, so it's not impossible that they could have armor and a shield and some sort of gun. But it does start to get a little bit more tricky. And I do just kind of wonder if the rule system will just, by definition, will have to limit the sort of games that can be adopted. I'm sure there's clever designers who can think ways around doing this sort of stuff. So let's try and think. What could we have a cooking game where you had a sword and a shield?
Particular kind of buff for a saucepan and frying pan.
Yeah, so you're on that kind of level, aren't you? Where you can think of ways around it, but it doesn't. A shield doesn't really make much sense in a cooking game, which may be to do with kind of speed of. I suppose you could have it that like you can use a shield and it can shield you from incoming customers, so you have more time. You could do it as like a time slowdown or something like that. But we are starting to have to get quite imaginative about that kind of stuff. So I think that's just kind of one issue. The other interesting one is they've got this character called Mike, which is so I'm going to try and pronounce his full name. So it is Antgrim Spankblaze III, Earl of Neo Kattegat, the hungover lord, stealer of Titan wine, commonly known as Mike. Okay, so there's Mike. He's very much a fantasy kind of robotic kind of golem type character. As a character, it's kind of interesting. He's kind of person you'd like to have in your game. But again, he would work very well in a fantasy environment. I'm not quite sure how well he'd work in Age of Rust, at least as pictured here, because he's like a fantasy character and that's like a sci-fi game. In our nominal cooking game, I don't know quite how he fits in. Obviously, you could have him. You could be some sort of customer who gives you some sort of advantage or stuff. So it's not impossible. But I think the more complex you make the more complex and specific you make these items, obviously the kind of harder it is for developers to integrate that. And I think in a very small way we saw this in when was it? It was a little bit a year ago now, where Alto had this game development competition where they had, I think, can you remember? I think it's just 5 items, and it was people had to actually come up with games that integrated these items, and there were quite a lot of interesting game design. They were just basically design doc kind of stage. And you did see these items, even though they were things like swords and shields, being modified or added into very different sorts of games. So I think people can do it, but I think at some point it kind of probably becomes a disadvantage more than an advantage, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, I don't think we need to be too hypothetical about it, because when it comes to Enjin's Multiverse, you actually do have a couple of games on there that are within the multiverse, but they don't really fit into the whole action adventure combat mechanics. I mean, Diverse is one of them.
Tell me about that one. I don't know that.
So with that one, that's an augmented reality game. So it has a couple of. It's basically like for augmented reality creatures, and I'm not really too sure of the full mechanics of that one, but it also has a way for like giving users the ability to make things out of blueprints and schematics. So it would seem a little bit weird to me that if you're trying to build something elaborate and complex and diverse, that a sword or a gigantic wine-stealing titan would help you in any way there. If anything, I feel like that would hinder your blueprints.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just looking at some other games. Space Misfits, I've not heard of, but obviously Space Misfits sounds like it's going to be some sort of space sci-fi game, doesn't it? So I guess this is kind of that's not what I thought it was going to be. That's very brightly coloured. It's not my grandma's space game. It says intense PvP battles. So it is like a. Okay, so goodness me, this is ambitious as well. All this ambition. So I guess it's interesting. I just kind of think. Obviously, when the games start to come out, we'll see. at the end of the day, if the games, what matters most is if the games are good or not. Because if the games aren't good, then they won't have any users. So any of this background stuff doesn't really matter. But I wonder what I guess my gut feeling at the moment is the Enjin Multiverse will work. It will attract players, but it will very quickly kind of condense down to a certain type of game that will fit into that multiverse. So you won't have a CryptoKitties, you won't have a Cheese Wizards, you won't have probably a Battle Racers, you won't have a Major League Baseball Champions. You'll have a very specific sort of fairly competitive gameplay, combat-driven sort of gameplay, kind of fantasy-ish, maybe a bit of sci-fi space stuff, a bit kind of male focus, kind of a typical what we might call a typical kind of gaming tropes that appeal to teenage 20 male kind of core gameplay kind of attributes, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think at the moment, having that as a multiverse and having items that move between those games, it does make sense. I guess the problem then is you've got quite a tight sort of kind of cultural fit and kind of game design fit. So you'll probably tend to have, excuse me, that's my alarm going off. So you will tend to have kind of quite a lot of competing games. So you can already see that there's quite a lot of kind of sword-based games, and you kind of how many sword-based games do people want to play? I don't know. So that'll be, I guess, interesting to see. So maybe it will work. The multiverse will work, but actually there may only be 5 games that kind of really kind of work in a way in terms of kind of commercially, in terms of having a lot of users and kind of generating a lot of NFT traffic. I guess the other interesting thing, which is going a bit more widely, is what's interesting is in blockchain, taken as a kind of broader sense, is you have this idea, certainly with Ethereum at the moment and NFTs, is each game has its own marketplace pretty much, where most of the activity happens. But then you also have these second party or third party marketplaces like OpenSea. And if you look at the numbers, it's quite interesting. I didn't really realize. I was looking at the numbers this week in a bit more detail. And so OpenSea is pretty small in terms of people using it. Like about 100, between 100 and 200 people use it on a daily basis. But it has quite a big volume of Ether going through. So depending on the day, probably about 50% of the volume of dApps, gaming dApps on Ethereum is going through OpenSea. And I do wonder with something like an Enjin Multiverse that everything's kind of locked into it. I wonder if you kind of lose that kind of wider interoperability in terms of how blockchain can spread into different services and stuff. I don't think with Enjin they can necessarily stop people buying and selling on OpenSea, because OpenSea, I suppose they can do, because they're going to be on their own. They're not going to be on Ethereum anymore. They're going to be on their own blockchain. So I guess that's exactly what they'll do. But I do think potentially the more control you try and have, or too much control is a bad thing, I think, in the blockchain world. People like to have the flexibility. And at some point, I think you can do it already. People might want to sell 2 CryptoKitties and an Axie for a high-end Gods Unchained card. Have those? I don't know what's the phrase they use for. I can't remember what the phrase they use for it. But there's different ways of doing these kind of swaps where I'm not just swapping Ether for Bitcoin or CryptoKitty for a CryptoKitty. I'm swapping these kind of different items from different games, potentially in the long run, I guess, with stuff like Cosmos and Polkadot, things on different chains, swapping them in a because that's when you have massive liquidity in the market, and that's when things really start to take off. So probably this is me being a bit too looking too far down the line, but I do wonder whether Enjin, how it will deal with that. Do you have any view? I suppose I've painted you into a corner there, James.
Well, I mean, I think you kind of said it best when it comes to having that fine balance about just how centralized Enjin can be over this sort of system. And it's kind of like that George Washington reference to democracy, is that it's like fire, in that you can't let it burn too far out of control. And the same is for centralization. You have to have it be effective enough to just have some firm but fair rules there to allow for the ecosystem to flow on effectively and allow for things like the marketplace to work well and for it to be enough to incentivize people to use it. But if they become too restrictive, then people are just going to pull away because other more free systems will crop up and give them a viable alternative. I think for this ecosystem, it's something that we need to see more progress in. I mean, one of the ways in which they are making a little bit of a breakthrough is through their mobile wallet. And it's been fun using that one, but I think we need to see more games and more assets on there to really make a longer judgment.
Hmm. Now, I have to say, yeah, I mean, on the technical side, I think there's no one better in the blockchain kind of certainly gaming world, but in general blockchain stuff than Enjin. I mean, their wallet is obviously there's all the kind of fuss this early this year that it was one of the wallets that was being integrated into the Samsung S10 range, and yeah, I've been using it as well. It's to some degree it's not unlike other wallets. In terms of the way you can kind of trade ERC20 tokens, then it's integrated Changely and Kyber network, and can't remember Bancor as well. So they're basically kind of just integrating third party kind of decks, so you can do that kind of stuff. But it is pretty easy to use, and I think it is kind of has slightly more security measures than some other wallets I've used. So I think they're really good from that point of view. And I think they've built their own what do you call it? Built their own Explorer to explore, the kind of block Explorer stuff, which is really good. And they're doing a lot of deals. I think, but, for people to use other people to use their tech, not necessarily games companies. So I think they're really good from the tech point of view. I guess for me, it's just I want to be really excited by one of the games that's going to be on the platform. Which I guess to finish off, which of the games that have you seen? Well, which of the games do we think are going to be the one that's going to be their kind of like their breakthrough, the one that's going to get their multiverse to scale? What do you think? Which one are you most interested in?
That's a good question. I mean, I'd honestly say that in terms of like visuals, mechanics, the application of interoperable multiverse items, I mean, Age of Rust has shown us more, but like I said, the biggest disadvantage about that one is that's a long hinge that we're waiting on. So if we're expecting that one to really like set the world on fire for blockchain gamers looking for a real use case, we're going to be waiting a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think Age of Rust and Forest Night are both really interesting kind of games conceptually and like the art style, but they're both, I think their challenges are more to do with having big enough dev teams behind them to actually kind of fulfill that vision. Again, Nine Lives Arena, I really like the concept behind it. I'm not graphically, I don't think it's particularly up to much. Again, they're a pretty small team as far as I can know. I don't know if they've done any console game stuff before, so there is a ambition thing there. I think for me the interesting one, I don't know if you know any more about it. It seems to have gone quite recently. Is War of Crypto. So War of Crypto seems like the kind of most comprehensive game in terms of a decent vision, really good artwork, a team that seems to have some experience and a chance of fulfilling that. But I'm not quite sure what's going on with it at the moment. So
I completely agree with you there. I mean, from the visuals and the sort of attention to detail that they've had for their NFTs, I really do appreciate it. And yeah, as for progress, I need to really dive into what they've been up to. And I think they were one of the first actually to offer some scope of interoperability in a real use case. So they had their, I forget the name of the NFT, but it's basically this golem looking thing.
yeah, that's Mike, isn't it?
Were it allowed for interoperability between both that game and Minecraft?
Minecraft? Oh, okay. I don't know about that then.
They allowed for it to be used for, I think it was a difference between the premium edition that they had, which is a different color scheme, and its later ones where it would allow you to use it on dedicated Enjin Minecraft servers.
Okay, I'm not sure about that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think in all these things, the proof of the concept is in the release of the game and be able to play these kind of things. And I guess that doesn't really matter what our opinions are. Yes, we're supposed experts, but when the games come out, that's going to be the deal. And I suppose probably with Enjin, what's going to happen is going to be quite a lot of games are going to come out in quite a short period of time, I would imagine. Yeah, and I guess so. Crypto Wars was originally down for a Q2 release. I think obviously that they can't go live until the Enjin mainnet goes live. So until that happens, then I think that's probably what is pushing everything back. So hopefully, I guess the Enjin mainnet will go live, and then quite quickly after that, we will start to see the first games going live, and then maybe maybe all will become kind of more apparent in terms of how this model works. But anyway, I don't think we haven't come to any conclusions. As I say, I'm not kind of particularly negative or positive. We're just kind of like kind of discussing with everything the strengths and weaknesses. We will see what transpires. Thank you very much, James. Been a bit of a meandering podcast this week, but thanks for sticking with it.
No worries. It's the digressions that tend to be the most interesting.
And yes, listeners, if you have any you want to comment on our digressions, feel free. You can find me on Twitter at GamingGMG. Obviously, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already to the podcast where we talk every week about blockchain games. Sometimes about the news, sometimes about kind of concepts like this. Sometimes going to be having some more interviews with people over the coming weeks about specific projects. So if you're into blockchain games, please do subscribe. But thanks for listening to this, and hope you come back next week.